Hey, hello, everybody. It is Mike Young with aPlantBasedDiet.org, and I am super excited here today to be talking with Dr. Neal Barnard, of course, the founder of PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Dr. Barnard is like a rock star legend in this movement, and I am so happy to be talking with Dr. Barnard today. Welcome, Dr. Barnard.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Yes, and I am coming to you from our mobile studio. And the last time I saw you, you were at Raleigh Veg Fest, and you had done one of the first remote presentations that we did on our video wall in downtown Raleigh. How was that experience for you?
Well, it was a great experience, and think how things have changed ever since. And it's great that we can still continue to be in touch and in many ways reaching more people than ever.
Yes, because I know that you saw the camera we had out on the crowd, but you couldn't kind of see that we weren't panning around with the camera, but we were right in the middle of downtown Raleigh. There were folks walking by who had no idea what was going on. We were in a city park right in the center of the city. So you were just going out to everybody there.
Well, thank you. That was a nice experience. I'm glad to be following up with you now.
Yes. So I would like to kind of give a background on how you became to be really one of the leaders in this movement, this plant-based and vegan movement. And I think that, unless you want to tell me otherwise, it's really through your organization that you founded, right? The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine.
PCRM got started in 1985, and that's when I was really in my first year of practice after completing my residency. I did medical school and residency here in DC and was working in New York City, and decided to set up PCRM at that time.
Okay, well, I know that in 1985, I was actually growing up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. in Montgomery County. I didn't know anything about plant-based eating or veganism or anything. I mean, like most folks at the time, I think, who grew up in the 70s and 80s when I did anyway, we didn't know anything about this. So you were just an absolute pioneer. Even, like I said, I was growing up in the DC suburbs, which you think is one of the more forward-thinking areas, but I really had no idea what you were doing.
It's funny because it's not as if we didn't have some clues that this should be the direction we want to go in. Frances Moore Lepay had written a book about the environment, and her focus wasn't really on recycling and that kind of stuff. It was basically saying, how are we going to feed a hungry world? And you can do it by feeding soybeans and things to animals, and then you eat the animals, and it's a big waste. Or you could eat the corn and soybeans and all the other things directly, and it would end up using a lot less land. And so she was really creating an environmental message back before people were thinking about environmentalism with a capital E. I'm talking about climate change and the fact that it may even be borderline too late to make these changes before it became really the crisis it is today. And same with regard to health. There were people who did recognize that vegetarians were generally healthier. That research had not gone nearly as far as it needs to. Dean Ornish hadn't yet done the studies showing that heart disease could be reversed, or our work showing that the same is true with diabetes and weight issues and lots of other things. But nonetheless, there were pretty clearly benefits. Vegan diets, people didn't frankly even know how to pronounce that word, let alone using it. And then with regard to animals, you'd really have to, well, for some reason, people haven't really figured out that animals don't really get the good end of the stick when they end up on your plate. And I think for whatever reason, that's not a lack of knowledge. I think that's something about the human spirit that likes to just push away potentially unpleasant news. But as time has gone on, people have learned that there is massive cruelty, surprising cruelty, even in things like the dairy industry or Thanksgiving turkeys, where people wouldn't have thought it could really be so bad. And I guess what's happened in the interim is the environmental motivations have grown, the health motivations have grown, and the consciousness about what we're doing to animals has grown. And so all of those get together with the idea of let's make some changes.
All right, so you said 1985 was the year that you founded PCRM. What was what really got you going and made you make that decision to start it up? What were you thinking at the time?
The seeds had been planted a number of years earlier. But before I went to medical school, I actually had an experience. I had grown up in North Dakota, And so I was not really thinking about the ethics of what we ate. And my dad had grown up in the cattle business, as had my grandfather and kind of everybody else. And so I had a job at McDonald's as a kid and everything else. But the year before I went to medical school, I was working in a Fairview Hospital in Minneapolis in the basement, in the morgue. And when somebody died in the hospital, I would help the pathologist do the post-mortem examination. And I would weigh things and take notes and clean up. And one day a guy died in the hospital of a massive heart attack, probably from eating hospital food, but that's
Right.
another story. And anyway, so the body was there and the pathologist knew that I was going to go to medical school. So he would make sure that every autopsy was sort of a lesson for me.
Ah.
And so he cut a big chunk of ribs off the chest and he pulled this pie wedge of ribs off the chest and set it on the table. And he had me look at the heart. And the heart has coronary arteries on top of it. And he said they're called coronary because they're crowning the heart. And he sliced one open and asked me to look inside. And inside this artery was basically just garden variety atherosclerosis, which is this so-called hardening of the arteries. But it meant the artery was kind of crunchy instead of it being a flexible tube. And the same thing was there in the carotid arteries going up to the brain and in the renal arteries going to the kidneys. And so at the end of the exam, he wrote up that this person had a systemic atherosclerosis. This is what killed him. And he put and he left. So I had to put the ribs back in the chest to try to make them line up with the other ribs and sew up the skin and everything. And when I was done, it was about 1 o'clock. I went up to the cafeteria. They were serving ribs for lunch.
Oh my.
And so I looked at it and I thought, it looks like a dead body and it smells like a dead body. And I realized it is a dead body, actually.
Yeah.
And I didn't become a vegetarian on the spot, but I could not eat that. And I started to think through, when I was a kid, I hunted. I had a shotgun and my dad and I would go out and kill, ducks and geese and so forth. And I drove cattle to slaughter. And I started to kind of rethink all of this stuff and started to also think through about my grandpa who died of a stroke. He was 62 when he died. And I thought, well, like maybe this is not the best path we're on. And so anyway, that's not very scientific really. And I don't know that I'd even call that ethical, but I started to pay more attention to what we ate. And so anyway, when I got out of medical school, I started thinking, okay, we don't do anything to prevent illness. We wait until a heart attack comes in the emergency room door, or we wait until cancer shows up on a mammogram. Why don't we do something about prevention here?
Right.
Why don't we focus on nutrition, which, people don't get overweight based mostly by genetics or being sedentary. It's really food choices that are the primary driver.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, we need to change that. And so I started the physicians committee with these things in mind. And also I wanted to change how ethics are applied in research studies. We do a lot of abuse to animals in research. I thought that needs to change, not only for the animal's sake, but also for the sake of good science. And so that's what launched us.
All right. Well, I like the name too, Committee for Responsible Medicine. So you obviously had thought at some point that medicine was not being as responsible as they could be. Is that kind of the thought in the name?
We still have a long ways to go there. A person goes in to see a doctor and they have type 2 diabetes. And the doctor might tell them about medicines and might start the patient on medicines, but might fail to tell them about the effect of diet on their diabetes beyond just a few cursory and probably 50 years out of date bits of advice. There is a good complex science of using food for diabetes. The patient might have severe heart disease and chest pain, and they'll talk about medicines. They don't hear about how food could make that go away.
Right.
And so many other conditions. And I am sorry to say that although today doctors are really quite good with pharmacology, if there is a new drug out there, they know about it quickly. But when it comes to nutrition, which is really the main driver of the most problematic diseases that we face, nutritional ignorance is accepted as the standard of care. And I say that not to indict my fellow doctors, but I say that to raise an alarm that if we're going to really help patients, we have to focus on nutrition. And if we don't, not only do we hurt the individual patient who's got diabetes or has heart disease and is is not helped adequately. But we weigh down the system. I was talking to a woman day before yesterday who said, I was trying to find a new primary care doctor. I couldn't get an appointment for 3 months. Why? Because their waiting rooms are filled with people who are not really getting a very good advice on how they can tackle so many of these things on their own. We shouldn't need the amount of medical care that we have. And the reason we do is we're not doing the right things to help prevent it and to help empower people with health. Don't get me wrong, there's an important role for doctors. There's a critically important role for drugs, but that should not be the number one thing in life. A medical clinic should not be the main employer in the town you live in, but that's the way it is now in most cities.
Yes, I hear you. I mean, and of course you had all these realizations back in the mid 80s, which is phenomenal. I mean, like you said, it was mostly anecdotal based on your own observations, right, of what was going on, but you were obviously correct.
Well, yes, but in fairness, I mean, there has been a science that has been moving along for quite some time. For example, look at cancer rates. Back in the 1960s and 70s, it was clear that, say, women in Japan had a much lower risk of breast cancer compared to women in Omaha. Why? Well, is it genetic? No, it's not. It's because they have a diet based on rice, as opposed to being based on pork chops. And so there had been a science there as well. And there had been plenty of people who started to look at how research was done. And they would say, maybe we should not be trying to model diabetes in a rat. Maybe we should be investigating it in the human body. But at that time, I think it was a bit of a awkward way of teaching. When I was in medical school, we were supposed to take dogs and experiment on the dogs as a way of learning about pharmacology. And I refused to do that. But that was still very commonly done.
Yeah, and I know you talk about hunting and things. Just for me, I've never been able to hunt. I don't think I could ever do it. Because I just realized early on, I didn't have the insight that you've had early on, but I just realized that I don't want to hurt these animals. I don't want to eat them. It's gross to me. It's always been gross. So that was my take on it, and it just happened to be, as you're saying, the right thing to do for your health, which is excellent that you have, you took that time there in the mid 80s to start PCRM, and you were saying that you're also helping to stop animal testing in the medical industry. I know you're also doing other things with legislation. So why don't you please elaborate on the work that you've been doing since 1985 and up to the present in these areas?
Well, part of it has been, we've done quite a lot of clinical research, and part of it has been changing policies. The main policy that determines what Americans are supposed to eat, it's called the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And every 5 years, they are adjusted, modified, revised. And you should see how this works. I have to tell you, when we started working on it, there's an auditorium here in Washington, D.C., and it's at the USDA. And at the front of the auditorium is a stage, and there's the committee sits there. This is the committee that's going to decide what Americans should eat.
Right.
And there's a microphone on the floor in front of them, and on a stand. And there's an auditorium full of people. And the first person comes up to the microphone and says, "Hello, I'm from the National Dairy Council. And don't forget, we've got a calcium crisis in this country. We want to make sure that we're telling Americans they need milk every day, 3 glasses." And that person sits down. And the next person comes up and says, "Hello, I'm from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Don't forget, we need a lot more protein, a lot more iron in our diet, and meat is an excellent source." And they sit down. And the next person comes up and says, "I'm from the fisheries." And the next person is from the liquor industry, and some from the Sugar Association and the Salt Institute. And by the end of the afternoon, the committee members, they have their heads in their hands. And they look totally despondent, like, how am I supposed to make all you people happy?
Well, I have a question, Dr. Barnard. Are those really the lobbyists for those industries?
Lobbyists and spokespersons.
Okay, yeah.
And you might be saying, why should they have anything to do with what we're told to eat? And that would be right. But all they're concerned about is money. That's jobs and that kind of stuff, which you can understand. That's their thing. But in the year 2000, we filed a lawsuit against the US government. And it was to allege that of the 11 members on that committee in that year, 6 of them had industry ties. I'm talking about they had been paid
Oh,
by the dairy industry, egg industry, meat industry, and that they could not be trusted to be unbiased. And we won that lawsuit. The judge for the federal district court for the District of Columbia said, "You're right. Not only was it unbiased, but it was done kind of behind closed doors. The public couldn't really look at the documents that were being reviewed." And so I have to say, since then, now it's been 2 decades, the process has gotten better. Those people are still there. They weigh in, but the
yeah.
committees are more objective. Industry is a little more hands-off, and the number of doctors who are standing up to that microphone and saying, "I want to tell you what kills my patients." You might think ice cream and steak and pork chops are something that you want to push, but that's not health.
Yeah.
And so we have more and more people saying that, and the guidelines are not perfect, but they're getting better. And in 2009, we brought forth a replacement for the pyramid. You remember the pyramid?
Yes.
The pyramid said you should have grains and vegetables and fruits, but have some meat, some dairy. And so we said, well, wait a minute. You're actually better off if you don't have any meat at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have dairy, you don't need dairy. And so we made a plate, and the plate was 4 quadrants. And it said people need fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes or beans. And we sent that to the US government, said, that's better. And we didn't hear back. So in 2011, it had been 2 years, we sued the US government, just simply to force them to respond to our petition about,
Right.
pyramid out, plate in. And to their credit, the US government released a plate, and it was in 4 quadrants, and it said vegetables and fruits, and it said grains, and instead of legumes, it said protein.
Ah.
Now, it said it could be meat, but it doesn't have to be meat. It could be beans, or it could be nuts or tofu or whatever. So, okay. And then they had a dairy group on the side. So I'm not taking any credit for it, but I have to say, my plate looked almost identical to the plate that we had given them 2 years earlier.
Yeah.
And so my point is that you can change. You can push the government. You sometimes have to fight a little bit, and sometimes you have to send your lawyers down there to serve them with a
That's
notice
right.
of litigation. But we're happy to do that. And we have been pushing them in the right direction. And if you look at the progress that has been made, just walk into any grocery store, walk up to the dairy counter. The dairy counter used to have dairy in it.
Yeah.
Now there's soy milk, rice milk, hemp milk, oat milk, almond milk in 6 different flavors. And then the meat counter. If you look around, you'll see veggie sausage, veggie bacon, veggie burgers of all different kinds. Now, we're not where we need to be yet.
Mm-hmm.
But back in 1985, you didn't hear about vegan cheese and all these
That's
kinds
right.
of things. So things are improving. And I'm happy to say that those same motivations to be kind to animals, to be kind to the earth, to be kind to your coronary arteries, to help your kids get healthier, those motivations are more forward in people's thinking than they were before.
Yes, absolutely. It sounds like the way you describe it, you're really almost like a watchdog organization for what's going on there in DC, which is excellent. We need someone like that because, as you said, the government is hearing from all the large, entrenched industries, which, as you
Yes.
said, they have their what they want to do, but they may not be looking at it in the correct way. And I do believe that over time, that everyone will probably change over to this lifestyle. It's only a matter of time, and knowledge, and of course your work, because your work, I will tell you, I know that you're one of the leading organizations, if not the leading organization, that is spearheading all this at a legislative level with the U.S. government anyway. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And what else? I know you mentioned you not only work with the food plate, which you've helped obviously give direction to the government on, and you've also said that animal testing. Now, do you have to go to the U.S. government for the animal testing in the medical industry? How is that addressed?
There are 3 big chunks of animal testing if you divide it up. One is the use of animals in education. One is the use of animals in product testing for safety. And the third is research on disease. And with regard to animal use in education, that was one of the first ones where we really gave our attention because first of all, we knew that we could eliminate it. And I guess we weren't quite that cocky at the beginning. We weren't sure that we could, but we thought we could. When I was in medical school, we were supposed to take dogs, live dogs, and you tape the dog on the table, and then you inject norepinephrine.
Mm.
and you write down that the norepinephrine makes the dog's heart beat faster. And you might run an EKG strip and you paste that in your report. And then you give propranolol and you show the dog's heart goes slower. And then you can exsanguinate your dog, which is to draw blood out of one of the veins. And if you draw the blood out sufficiently, the dog's heart will stop.
Mm.
And then the students then look around at each other. And one says, "Is he dead?" And the other one says, "I think so." And they don't know what to say. And they say, "Well, let's write this up." And they do. And they go home. And when they leave and the janitor turns off the light, there's a line of trash bags all up and down the hallway. And the medical students go home and they explain to their girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, parents what they did that day.
Yeah.
And over dinner, their parents say, "You did what?" And then their little sister says, "You just killed your first patient." And they say, "I did not." And anyway, they get into this big wrangle. And two things have died that day. One is the animal. The other is that part of the medical student's brain that says, "I'm going to do what I can to save life." And that from henceforth, they're thinking, well, I'm going to do what I need to survive academically. And I thought that is just wrong. And so when I was required to do this when I was a medical student at George Washington University.
Mm-hmm.
But I said to my instructor, I said, "I know this is a requirement, but I am not going to do that." And he said, "Well, I'm not asking you if you're going to do it. This is a requirement." And as this conversation was beginning, there was another student there, and she said, "Well, he's not going to do the dog lab, and I'm not going to do the dog lab." So we had a movement. We had two of us, and we didn't. And so I made a little mental note, but let's get rid of that. And so when I started the physicians committee, I thought we've got to stop that, and we did. And so we started working with medical schools to bring in alternatives, and it took time, but we gradually got the dog labs from being required to being optional. And then some of them said, "Well, we're not going to use dogs, we'll use pigs. Nobody cares about a pig, do they?" We'd say, yeah, we're not going to kill we're not killing anybody today.
Right.
And in 2016, they were all gone. All the animal labs from every medical school in the United States and Canada was completely finished, thanks to our work. But that still left some targets in residencies and say trauma training. They were using animals. So we've worked really hard and we've eliminated the use of animals in pediatrics, trauma training, except for one. Most emergency medicine ones are gone. Even surgery. Most surgical residencies don't use animals anymore at all. So that's a real winner. The use of animals in product testing is a second big area. We've been working with EPA. They used to be our enemies. They're now our big friends because they have found that you can use modern testing that is much more accurate and faster than force feeding something to a rat or a rabbit or guinea pig. And then when it comes to research per se, it's more challenging, but you can easily show that rather than trying to model diabetes in a rabbit, if instead we study the human genetics of diabetes through human cells, or bring in human beings as we do into our laboratory, and we study things in their bodies, obviously do this ethically and carefully and safely, but you can then see how diets affect people. And we did a study not too long ago where we brought in people, large group of people, change their diets. And by the way, the diet is a humane diet. It's no animal products, really low in fat, healthier diet there. We're not using animals at all, but we can now not only change what people are eating and measure the changes in blood sugar and the changes in cholesterol and changes in weight and blood pressure and inflammation in their bodies. But through modern scanning devices, I can look inside a living human being and I can watch the changes in their muscle cells and their liver cells, the changes in how their insulin resistance is giving way to insulin sensitivity. I can see it in real time. And if you said, no, don't do any of that, go take a rat and try to give the rat diabetes, I would say that is A, cruel, B, backward, C, maybe if that's what you did in 1930, I'm not going to do that in 2021. But we have a long ways to go. There's still a lot of cruel research out there that needs to be changed. But that's our mission, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, well, there's obviously a point in time when the old ways of doing things are just not needed anymore due to technology, advances in technology, like you're saying, and you are really kind of at the leading edge of just making sure that folks are aware, because people have to be made aware, and then they'll change, right? Once they're made aware of the new technologies, and that obviously that's what you've done, and that's excellent work. I mean, I'm so glad to hear all that. Wonderful.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, thank you for saying that. But that said, we've also got to push. I mean, there are people who
yes.
know about technologies, but they still do stupid things.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. There are researchers who wanted to know if saffron, the spice,
Yep.
saffron, would lower your blood pressure.
Hmm.
So you might think, okay, I can do that. I can bring in some volunteers and people with high blood pressure. I'll give them some saffron. We'll have them have a measured dose of it every day, put it in their food, and we'll see if their blood pressure comes down. We'll keep everything equal. We won't change their exercise and whatever. And we'll see. It's not what they did. They took live rats and put tubes down their throats into their stomach and
Oh,
put saffron inside, and then measure their blood pressure as time went on. And then you kill them, and then you can dissect them and see what changes there are. And then you can decide saffron may help or may not help. There is a journal called Nutrients, which is a good journal in many ways. They publish some of our research,
mhm.
but they publish this kind of research. And I wrote to them and I said, wait a minute, why on God's green earth would you publish something like that? This doesn't help anybody. Do you know why they publish that? Do you know why the people do this? Because when they publish an article in Nutrients, the journal says in order to publish it, you have to pay us an author fee
Hmm.
of about $2,400, $2,500, and we'll publish your article. And in 1 month's time, they publish 3 or 4 or 500 articles in
Right.
Nutrients. Yes, they're all online. And do the math. It's a big money maker for the journal. And if they
Yeah.
say, no, we're not going to take your rat study, they've just forfeited some money. Never mind that it didn't help anybody. And why would researchers do that? Because maybe it's too expensive for them to bring in human volunteers, or maybe they're impatient. And so they bring in animals instead. And the real beauty of it for animal researchers, they don't have to register their experiments.
Hmm.
If I am going to do an experiment on human beings where I'm going to have people with high blood pressure and I'm going to change their diets, I'm going to measure their blood pressure. Before I recruit one person into that study, I have to register the experiment with the federal government on a site called clinicaltrials.gov. And everybody knows that I'm doing it. And so if I decide not to publish my findings because it didn't work out very well, everybody will know.
Ah,
But if I
got it.
bring in rats and I give them some medicine or some drug or some spice or whatever it is, and the research doesn't work out very well, I don't have to register it.
Yeah.
I don't have to publish it. And if it doesn't work out, nobody's the wiser. And researchers have found that animal experiments tend to be skewed. They favor the products that are being tested, because if they
Right.
didn't, nobody has to publish it.
That's right.
So it's terrible for the
Hmm.
animals. It's terrible for science. And frankly, it's terrible for the young students who take jobs doing this research, because it teaches them a perversion of science.
Yeah.
It's wasting their time, wasting their talents, when they could instead be doing the hard work that we do, which is to study the biology of a human being ethically and safely, but in a way that's applicable to human health.
Yeah, I see. That's very enlightening to hear that. It's sobering. I mean, it's sad to hear that. Do you think that'll change? Do you think over time will we be like these folks will be required to do human studies? And I think you and I both know what that's going to show. It's going to show towards a whole food plant-based diet, most likely, right?
Right. Yes. I do think that in the same way as people don't wear fur anymore very much, people have learned a lot about things. They've set them aside. Back in the 1950s, you'd see movies of maybe a monkey riding on a pony, and people now think, wait a minute, what did you have to do to that monkey to make him do
Mhm.
that?
Yeah.
I think people are waking up to unethical things. You know, Ringling, the circus, they said, okay, people don't want to see an elephant stand on his head because they know you got to beat the heck out of him to make them do this. People are coming along. But to this day, people have given a pass to folks in white coats. And they say, well,
Sure.
I know you're probably mean well, so I'm not going to challenge you.
Mm.
I think the gloves are starting to come off,
Yeah,
and we're realizing that when people do cruel things to animals, they have to be challenged. And when they do, the animals will benefit, but science will benefit too, and so will the people who shift into a better way of doing their investigations.
yeah. Well, you've done excellent work challenging. Like I said, I'm sure encountered resistance at every step of the way on these things. People don't like to change at all, whether it's good or bad. It's been my experience, and this is change for the better. And one of the,
Yes.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. And you can make big changes. Back, a decade ago, there was a group of chimpanzees in New Mexico that had been in retirement. They had been in laboratory research. They were in retirement. Researchers said, no, we want to bring you back and put you in experiments again. There's a Texas lab that wants you. And so these chimpanzees were shipped to Texas to be put back into experiments. And they were going to bring in more chimpanzees and more and more and more. Well, local activists found out about this, and they contacted us and said, we need to stop this. And they contacted the governor of New Mexico and said, what is going on? And we looked into it and we complained, and we went to members of Congress and we said, why are these chimpanzees being abused in this way? And to their credit, and the federal government pulled together an advisory panel through the Institute of Medicine. And they were given the question, do we need chimpanzee research?
Right.
Do we need to experiment on chimpanzees? Is there anything we need to experiment on chimpanzees for? And so the panel took that question in hand. They looked at cancer research and heart disease research and Alzheimer's research. And they issued a big, long report saying, no, there isn't any use in science where chimpanzees are really needed. And so to their credit, they gave that report to NIH, and NIH very rapidly pulled the plug. They said, okay, we're stopping all chimpanzee research. We're gonna retire all the chimpanzees, except for 50, because we might need these other 50 for something that we don't anticipate. And after about a year or two, we said, well, what the hell? You 50 could go too. So they ended it all.
Excellent.
And the beauty of that is, as expensive as it is to retire these chimpanzees, and it's a big job, if you don't need to use the animals that are biologically closest to us, how do you justify using animals that are more and more different from us, like a dog or a rat or a zebrafish? The research is more and more inapplicable the further you get from us. So my point is, you can win. We can make big changes, and it's just a question of continuing to push.
Yeah, well, I think you probably realized early on it was only a matter of time. Because I truly believe that, just a matter of time, and you all are doing the work. You're doing the hard work that's necessary, because the status quo just doesn't like to change, and that's true no matter what we're talking about. So again, I thank you for the work that you're doing there at PCRM, and I want to ask you another question about one of the things you brought up, which is your own research. You're having folks, patients come over to your building, right? You are doing research. Can you let us know about that? Is this something you're doing on a regular basis?
We've been doing it for many, many years. And what I think really made it famous in the beginning was diabetes, where we started to really try to have a better approach to diabetes. And we're looking at what causes diabetes. It's not caused by a metformin deficiency. Yes, you can prescribe metformin to a person with diabetes and they'll improve somewhat, but that doesn't get to the cause. The cause really is the foods that we eat that lead to obesity, that lead to insulin resistance. So we started to test various diets, and NIH, to its credit, in 2003 gave us a really nice grant to try to find a better diet for diabetes. And of course we did. And it involves getting the animals off your plate completely.
Yes.
And we found that we could really, really improve blood sugar, help people lose weight, get their cholesterols down and their blood pressures down, and improve them not only over the short term, but also over the long term. And then we started applying this same kind of approach to weight problems and cholesterol problems, blood pressure problems, and then chronic pain like migraines and rheumatoid arthritis. And then our maybe more recent research has looked at hormonal control, which, at the risk of getting too much into the weeds, your body is controlled by hormones, and foods can manipulate those hormones. So for example, if a woman is at high risk for breast cancer, because she's got a little bit too much estrogen in her blood, we can change her diet. And that in turn will bring the estrogen down a little bit. And in this case, it's high fiber diet, totally plant-based diet, no added fat. That brings estrogen down in a very nice way. And you can reduce the risk of breast cancer. Okay, that's great. I mean, it's phenomenal. That same kind of technology, manipulating hormones, can be used for so many things. Menstrual pain in a 18-year-old girl, menopausal hot flashes in her 48-year-old mom,
Yeah.
cancer in men, prostate cancer, thyroid conditions where the thyroid hormone is misbehaving. All of these areas are subject to change based on, frankly, something we never thought, and that's the food choices you make. So we've been doing a study lately on hot flashes, which we just did during the pandemic, and we found that we could knock out hot flashes to about 84% in women who, I have to say, their lives were just transformed by this simple diet change.
Yes.
And we also found that we could do research by Zoom, where because of the pandemic, we don't bring people here into our clinic as much as we used to, but we can do some of these studies working remotely using electronic scales and electronic apps on their phones so that we can track their symptoms and track their weight and track all kinds of things in huge numbers of people in ways we hadn't imagined even a few years ago.
That's excellent. So, I mean, this has almost been a true history lesson in the plant-based movement, I'd say, listening to you talk about, early on PCRM and some of the issues that you were attempting to, find success in, which you obviously did. And then you're working on newer and more groundbreaking things. So one of the things I want to ask you about too is just like the mission of PCRM. It sounds like it's maybe changed over time, or has it not? Or are you just looking for different things that fit this mission, or is it evolving?
Our mission has never changed. Our mission is to try to make medicine with a capital M, ethical and effective. And central to medical practice, unlike so many other kinds of professions, ethics is at our foundation. The Hippocrates famously said, "First, do no harm."
Yes.
And if we think about that, and every doctor knows that, and we apply it, that may not be true of the person who repairs your computer, or people who do other. I don't mean to speak ill of my IT friends, but what I mean to say is, in the medical profession, you must remember the ethical work you do, and so we apply that to research, we apply that to medical practice, we apply that to the need to bring in prevention, and so that has been our mission ever since ever since day one. So that means making research more ethical. And our job is to get the animals out of it. It takes time. It's not always easy. Getting them off your plate's a darn good idea too. And what we have found, though, is that there are more and better ways of doing this work. And so we have to adapt as these as we gain new abilities that we have.
Okay. Now, when you say adapt, I know one of the things you mentioned earlier was that we're not there yet, as you mentioned, the food. So what do you see on the horizon in the future in terms of getting there with the food?
If you look worldwide, the number of people who have diet-related illnesses, I think it's probably bigger than it's ever been. In China, relatively newfound wealth has meant that people can eat a whole lot more pork than they could a generation ago. So we're seeing diabetes and cardiovascular disease and certain cancers we wouldn't have had. In 1960, breast cancer was rare in Japan. By the year 2000, it was commonplace. And that's true for many other conditions. So with wealth comes all kinds of problems. I'm sorry to say, relative wealth. That said, and that's what we've seen here in the United States as well, is that our waistlines are collectively worse than they've ever been. That said, the number of people who want to change that and are taking steps to improve their own health and their family's health, that's a bigger group than it's ever been too. When back in 1985, health food stores were little places with dusty shelves and the cashier was named Sunshine, and you wanted to kill yourself. Nowadays, health food stores are enormous, and the range of products is huge. And look at the number of vegan books and vegan movies and vegan products And frankly, doctors, when we got started, there were not lots of, there's Michael Clapper and a few others who
Right.
were doing this kind of work, but not very many people were leading this charge. Things have changed now. So the future is bright, but I don't want that light at the end of the tunnel to stay very far away. I want us to approach it as rapidly as we can. So what that means is we got to make noise.
Yes.
By make noise, I mean, we've got to get books out and get movies out, and we've got to be clever. Erect a billboard that's got just enough garlic in it to make the press want to talk about it.
Right.
Do ads, do videos, do Zoom programs, which we've been doing like crazy, and not just here in the US, but all around the world.
Yes.
And it's the kind of work that you're doing. I mean, look at you. You are talking to lots of people all at the same time, and there's no way you're going to know. How many people do you educate or inspire? How many people say, hey, here's something I saw on Mike's program, and they tell somebody else about what you told them. That's what we're doing, what you're doing. That's what is going to win the battle.
Yeah, I agree. Just normalize all of this, right? It used to be a few years ago that anything plant-based was on the extreme, on the fringe. But I think it needs to be part of normal conversation. And you're obviously doing a tremendous amount of work for that as well. So again, very, very thankful. So what do you see? Do you see anything that you can even tell me about with PCRM in the future? Is obviously, I think some of the things you've done in the past, no one would believe were even possible when you started out on them. Is there anything like that you can tell me about, or is it just more fine tuning the message?
Well, it's more than fine tuning. When it comes to research and applying a healthy diet to new conditions, we do have to be quite robust. So we're now launching programs in type 1 diabetes, one on endometriosis, which is one of the most common gynecological complaints. We're doing lots of work applying it to new conditions. That's number one. And then we have very aggressive programs to make sure doctors know about it. And we have a new program out that I'm really, really excited. And it's, you might be the first person I'm telling about this,
Okay.
actually, outside of
Breaking
organization.
news, breaking news.
I'll tell you, it's called One Healthy World. And we all learned with the pandemic that we're in this Zoom box. And as painful as it may be to be on this rectangle, it also is empowering, because it means instead of reaching 30 people in a meeting room in a library, I can reach 1,000 people at one time in my Zoom meeting. So we started exploring this, doing sessions like fight diabetes with food and fight hot flashes with food. We were doing that. And then I realized, wait a minute, let's go bigger. So in January, we're launching a program that will be in Mandarin for people in China. It'll be in French for all the Francophone countries. I don't mean just France and Quebec, but part of West Africa and parts of the Caribbean. It'll be in Spanish for Mexico, Latin America, Spain, as well as the Latinos here in the United States. It'll be in English for the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, but also a separate English language program for India, because that's the one language people could agree on. And so it's 5 simultaneous programs going worldwide. Will it work? It'll work if people spread the word and let other people know about it. But it's going to be a weekly session, all done live. And the whole idea is, at the risk of sounding a little folksy, let's kind of join hands and say, yeah, I don't know if it's too late to save this planet. And I can't save all the animals that have already become somebody's dinner. And we can't totally undo the health problems that we might have caused ourselves. And the human body is pretty fragile anyway. But let's take into our hands the power of healthy food, put it to work, make some noise about it, and see what the hell we can do. So it's called One Healthy World. It debuts in January.
That's exciting. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an excellent overview of PCRM. I think anybody who was not sure of the history knows it all now, and can see that you all have come such a long way and had so many successes, and I'm sure many future successes as well. So I am so glad that you all are still here and obviously thriving. Truly, I think you're thriving and you're more relevant than ever. Really, truly, I think. I guess I'd love to just, you probably don't need it. It sounds like you're very, very self-motivated, but please keep staying at the forefront as you have. And, just keep up the groundbreaking work and successes that you are doing there at PCRM.
Well, this is very much a team effort. I mean, there are so many people all around the world who are doing this. I don't need to tell you the people like Caldwell Esselstyn and Colin Campbell and Dean Ornish and Mike Greger and John McDougall and so many others have really been doing groundbreaking work for a very long time and have inspired me. And here on our team here, we've got lots of really good doctors and researchers all working together toward a common aim. And the future is bright. Our challenges nonetheless are big. So we've got to remain optimistic and remain determined.
Yeah, and I totally agree with all these statements you just made, because there's room for everyone in this movement, and they're needed, truly. Everyone has their specialties, and as we've discussed here in this video, we know what PCRM is into, and like you said, other doctors, they have their other specialties as well, and everyone is needed really to propel this to normalcy, really. I think that's the ultimate goal, is that it's just normal and regular, and just the way we do life. That would be, I can't wait till that happens one day.
You bet.
So anyway, I wanted to also let folks know that from the organization PCRM, Chuck Carroll will be at our Southwest Florida Veg Fest in person, and also giving a talk, which is very exciting. It's on Sunday, February 13th, 2022. And Dr. Barnard, we will see you next at Fairfax Veg Fest in April in the Washington, D.C. area, not far from your offices. So
I can't wait. By the way, Chuck Carroll does such a fabulous job, heading up the exam room for us, the exam room live. I don't know if he's going to tell you this or not, but I'm going to brag. He just had his 6 millionth download of our program. That's in addition to the people who do watch it live. And he has not only been the #1 nutrition broadcast or podcast here in the United States, but he has been the #1 in 79 other countries. So anyway, and it's
world famous.
Well, it's because Chuck is the real deal.
Yes.
He has been there. He personally knows about what nutrition will do in his own life, in his life, but also he is straightforward when he's interviewing his guests. He is no nonsense. He goes straight to the heart of it.
I agree.
He and his audience knows that too. So anyway, I'm delighted that you and he are going to be working together.
Yes, and also I want to make sure I mention Dr. Stancic too, who is recently brought onto your organization. She was at our Naples Veg Fest. She did a remote presentation as well, like you did at Raleigh Veg Fest. So
yeah, if people don't know Sarai Stancic, Saray Stancic, Stancic. Sarai Stancic is an infectious disease specialist, a physician. But what made her really famous to a lot of people was her own battle with multiple sclerosis, where this is, practically a death sentence for young people. Yeah. She could barely, move around and so forth. But she, to her credit, she figured out the role of diet, put it to work big time, and has been an incredible inspiration, as well as a tremendous soldier for getting the word out to people who need it. And she inspires medical students and their professors and others. So she's really an integral part of our team too. Yeah,
I know it's a condition or diagnosis that you would think is almost hopeless, at least if you look at it in the way medicine has been up to this point, I think, in conveying information about it, right? But I think we're finding that the plant-based eating, correct plant-based eating, just has miraculous impact on the human body. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, and she's featured. The movie is Code Blue. It's a feature, and she's got a book called What's Missing from Medicine. So anyway, great stuff. Really inspiring.
Yes, I know. It's so hopeful. All the work you're doing also brings so much hope to the world and to individuals, to control their own health as well. So I'm again very thankful, and I think we've covered it all here. So thank you so much, Dr. Barnard, and I cannot wait to look forward to hear more, groundbreaking news, more successes from PCRM, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, in the future, because I know you all will be around for years and years, and will always be here. I say, just to help lead the way and to help guide us, and sometimes, as you said, forcefully when necessary, in a peaceful way, but still, you stand up to resistance and you succeed. So we are so thankful for that. Thank you. Lots more to come. All right. Well, thank you again. Have a great day, Dr. Barnard. Thank you. You too. All right. Bye-bye.